Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am Tim Huxley, Executive Director of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Asia, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this IISS Fullerton lecture in the ballroom of the Fullerton Hotel in the heart of Singapore's financial and business district. We have with us this evening approximately 200 guests from Singapore's business, media, intellectual and government communities. This evening's is the first lecture in the second annual series of Fullerton Lectures, and I'm extremely happy that it will be delivered tonight by Mr. Lim Hung Kiang, Singapore's Minister for Trade and Industry. This is the first occasion on which a Singapore Cabinet Minister has spoken in the Fullerton Lecture Series, and I think this is a most appropriate way in which to mark the commencement of this second cycle of IISS Fullerton Lectures. Born in 1954, Mr. Lim was educated at Raffles Institution and was awarded the President's Scholarship and Singapore Armed Forces Scholarship to read engineering at Cambridge, where he graduated with first-class honours. Following 9 years as an SAF officer, Mr. Lim went to Harvard to study for a master's in public administration. After serving in the Ministries of Defense and National Development, he was appointed as CEO of the HDB, the Housing and Development Board. Entering politics in 1991, Mr. Lim was elected as an MP in the Tanjong Pagar GRC and was appointed Minister of State for National Development. Following a succession of ministerial appointments in national development, foreign affairs, finance, health, and the Prime Minister's office, he assumed his current role at MTI in 2004. He is simultaneously Deputy Chairman of the Monetary Authority of Singapore and a Board Director of the GIC, the Government Investment Corporation. Few people are better qualified than Mr. Lim to speak on the crucially important issue that he will address this evening, the importance of free and open trade as an engine for economic growth in Singapore and its region. This is a topic of great relevance, not just to our audience here tonight, but also to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, which has been developing for the last several years an active and wide-ranging program on geoeconomics. Minister, we are extremely honored that you've agreed to speak in the Fullerton Lecture Series. We look forward with great interest to hearing your address on the topic Trade for Growth, Seizing Opportunities and Staying Competitive. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tim Huxley, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Very good evening to all of you. I'm delighted to be able to participate in the Fullerton Lecture Series this evening. Much has been said about the successes of trade liberalization and its positive impact on economic growth. So tonight, I'd like to share our experience and how, as a small state, we have benefited from our staunch belief in free and open trade. I will also elaborate on how Asia is pushing ahead with its integration, and also the need for all economies to engage with the world to remain competitive. Let me first begin with an overview of the prospects of the global economy. In summary, I would say that the global economic outlook is expected to remain modest at best for this year. In the US, the economy is likely to grow moderately. The onset of fiscal cutbacks will dampen consumer spending, although we can see improvements in the labor and the housing markets, and that will provide some growth support. The Eurozone is expected to remain in recession. Ongoing fiscal tightening, private sector deleveraging, as well as high unemployment rates will continue to weigh on growth. And in Asia, we expect Asian economies to remain relatively resilient supported by reasonably healthy domestic demand. However, the growth in Asia cannot completely offset the weaknesses in the advanced economies. There are, however, some risks to the global growth outlook. There are uncertainties over whether the global financial markets will adjust to the eventual tapering in the US quantitative easing in an orderly manner. And in the EU, the economic situation remains fragile and prone to potential flare-ups of the debt crisis. Other uncertainties include the credit situation in Asia and China, and also a possible global outbreak of respiratory viruses. According to a recent WTO report, G20 economies are putting in place more trade restrictive measures than trade facilitating ones, while the removal of previous trade restrictions have remained slow. The threat of currency wars and competitive devaluations thus continue to cast a shadow on the prospects of global economic recovery. So under such conditions of global persistently slow growth, countries need to keep their markets open to ensure that the engines of global growth continue turning. Earlier this year, the G20 has urged countries to refrain from using exchange rates for competitive purposes and to resist all forms of protectionism, and also to keep their markets open. This is an important message. All countries have a part to play in setting the world economy on a path of sustainable growth, and maintaining open markets is a very key element of this move. So as a small and trade-dependent economy, Singapore has every interest in keeping our markets open for trade and deepening our integration into the global economy, while ensuring that other countries play by the same set of rules and remain open. With neither natural resources nor a sizable domestic market, Singapore has always felt the need to be plugged into the global marketplace in order to attract businesses here. In the nearly 50 years since our independence, we have learned that economic openness is crucial in attracting foreign investments, which in turn generates growth and create good jobs for Singaporeans. That is why Singapore remains committed to economic openness and well-integrated global markets. Our fundamental economic policy of welcoming global talent and investment has ensured that we continue to play a prominent role in the development of this region's narrative. This policy will not change even as societal norms evolve. We also know that businesses need predictability, simplicity, and stability in order to plan ahead. We will therefore continue to create a business-friendly environment that helps our businesses and our companies to succeed. Even as we encourage efforts by companies that are already based here to deepen their presence and anchor themselves in Singapore, we are also grooming a pool of local companies that are well placed to seize new opportunities that emerge. We recognize that for our companies to grow and become globally competitive, they need to continually engage the world, be willing to innovate and improve productivity, and venture into new growth opportunities wherever they may arise. However, in encouraging our companies to venture abroad, we need to ensure that they are welcome into conducive external environments where they can flourish in a level playing field. We therefore need our partners to also keep their borders open, to trade and play by global trade rules in order to provide a sound business-enabling environment. Hence, the primacy of WTO and the role that it plays remains crucial. The WTO commits member governments around the world to keep their borders open and oblige them to follow through on their commitments through robust monitoring mechanisms. WTO rules embody the spirit of the multilateral trading system and are geared towards enhancing international trade. These rules also provide transparency and predictability to businesses operating around the world. It is important that Singapore and all members play our part to support the WTO to ensure that trade flows as freely as possible among countries. With challenges from the Doha Development Agenda, the 9th Ministerial Conference in Bali in December this year will give trade and economic ministers a chance to address the critical issues and for the WTO to continue to reinforce its central role in fostering trade and economic growth. Singapore also welcomes the WTO's efforts to push for new ground in areas beyond tariff elimination, particularly exemplified by the members' work on a trade facilitation agreement. We hope to secure a meaningful outcome for this agreement at the Bali ministerial meeting. Closer to home, Asia is undergoing a dramatic economic transformation. Buoyed by favorable demographics and propelled by rising political influence as well as economic affluence, it is increasingly seen as a region that will contribute significantly to global growth and global trade in the coming decades. A recent Asian Development Bank study suggests that by 2050, Asia could account for half of global GDP, trade, and investment. According to Ernst & Young, Asia will become the world's fastest growing consumer market over the next 10 years. Forecasts indicate that some 60 million homes in Asia will have annual incomes above $30,000 in 2020, compared with only 15 million in 2010. And over 85% of the population will earn more than $5,000 a year, up from the present 58%. This will not only change the landscape of intra-regional trade, but also will be a key driver of global trade. Meanwhile, the nature of world trade has also seen fundamental paradigm shifts. The era when most consumer products were manufactured in a single country by a single company and then shipped by a single agent to the destination, that era is over. The fragmentation of modern-day production networks across geographical boundaries has given rise to new patterns of trade and new global supply chains. This trend of globalization, coupled with the growing Asian market, has resulted in economic rebalancing and trade shifting towards Asia. Trade flows in the Asia-Pacific have already increased significantly. According to UNCTAD, intra-Asian trade has grown in terms of its share of global trade, from 42% in 1990 to 53% in 2011. And the volume of intra-Asian trade has also more than quadrupled, from $0.8 trillion in 1990 to $3.4 trillion in 2012. So this speaks of the potential of trading within and with Asia. Countries must therefore remain open to ensure that they are well poised to seize these new opportunities as they emerge. So Singapore is very fortunate to be in a strategic location in Asia. We have been a beneficiary of this deepening of world trade and economic integration between the East and the West. Our experience has shown that having an open economy can allow us to tap onto new trade patterns as a growth engine. This global Asia story is central to Singapore's trade and to our economic policies. And we want to continue to connect Asia to the world while being a base for the rest of the world to expand into Asia. At the same time, Asia is also moving towards greater integration so as to be able to fully take advantage of all these new opportunities. For example, ASEAN is making good progress towards achieving the targets of the ASEAN Economic Community by 2015. The ASEAN Economic Community, or the AEC, blueprint is set out as the roadmap, a series of actions that we are taking between now and 2015 to create a single community among ourselves. Our intention is to transform this region into a single market with a population of over 600 million people. The region also will be an integrated production base whose goods will then flow freely and seamlessly. And with this deeper integration of the region through the ASEAN Free Trade Area, we believe that the AEC 2015 will make ASEAN more competitive as a region and lead to a more conducive environment for businesses to operate and flourish here. Beyond the AEC of 2015, the ASEAN and our 6 FTA partners, namely Australia, China, India, Japan, Korea, and New Zealand, they have all also undertaking this very bold step to launch the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or the RCEP-RCEP. The RCEP seeks to link and consolidates all the FTAs that ASEAN currently have with our FTA partners under a single umbrella. The conclusion of RCEP will hence broaden and deepen the current linkages and engagement amongst ASEAN as well as with our FTA partners. Aside from its reach and its impact, RCEP will also be a game changer in terms of the region's efforts to deepen regional economic integration. Upon its completion, RCEP will represent one of the world's largest free trade area with a market comprising of more than 3 billion people and a combined GDP of more than 17 trillion US dollars. It is undoubtedly a very ambitious and complex undertaking, but this will provide a big boost to the liberalization and the facilitation of trade within the Asian region. RCEP will also reinforce ASEAN's centrality and will be one of the mantelpieces of our vision of AEC 2015. At the same time, ASEAN will be engaging with Hong Kong on an ASEAN-Hong Kong FTA. As one of Singapore's most important trading partners, we look forward to the deeper ties and boost to trade and investment that this ASEAN-Hong Kong FTA will bring to our region. Both the economies of Hong Kong and Singapore have a lot in common, and we have always been unequivocal advocates for trade liberalization and deeper regional integration. We believe that an ASEAN-Hong Kong FTA will further expand and enhance the trade networks in our region. At the same time, Singapore looks forward to working with Hong Kong to explore the many areas at which we can both achieve complementary synergies to propel both our economies forward. Beyond the immediate region, another important initiative that Singapore is actively involved in is the Multilateral Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the TPP. With a very forward-looking and open regional architecture, the TPP is envisioned to be a living document that will allow new members to sign on. Negotiations started in March 2010 with 8 members, and now is expanded to 11 with the inclusion of Malaysia, Mexico, and Canada. And when Japan joins as a 12th member next month, the TPP will in fact represent a free trade area of close to 800 million people and a combined GDP of about $27 trillion US dollars. This is about 40% of global GDP and 1/3 of world trade. So a successful conclusion of the TPP will liberalize the flow of trade across the Asia-Pacific, as well as ensure that the Asia-Pacific region remains open and business-friendly. Singapore sees both the TPP and the RCEP as complementary and contributory vehicles towards an FTA of the Asia-Pacific. When this comes about, this will bring the entire Asia-Pacific region together. Each pathway carries its own strategic importance in advancing regional economic integration. The RCEP strengthens the strategic imperative for continued engagement of ASEAN, particularly in stitching together on a contiguous FTA for the whole of East Asia. And at the same time, the TPP involves countries from both sides of the Pacific. There is significant overlap in terms of membership between the two pathways. ASEAN member states such as Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam, as well as FTA partners such as Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, will act both as a core as well as a bridge that will bring convergence between the TPP and RCEP. The creation of the FTA for the Asia-Pacific will be a monumental step for the region and a leap for global trade reform, a reaffirmation of the multilateral trading system. Both architectures are open and inclusive to whichever economic partners ready to meet the individual benchmarks as set by the respective parties. These negotiations are very important for Singapore, and we will work hard with all our partners to push for a smooth, successful, and ambitious outcome and conclusion for these negotiations. Despite our size, our partners continue to see value in working with Singapore as they understand that we have been a consistent beacon for global free and open trade. Over the years, Singapore has made important strides in growing our network of free trade agreements with all our major trading partners. To complement our 18 free trade agreements with our 24 economic partners, Singapore recently concluded an FTA with the European Union in December 2012. The EU, as you all know, is our second largest trading partner and our largest foreign investor. With the successful conclusion of the EU-Singapore FTA, Singapore will have FTAs with our economic partners who account for almost 80% of our total trade. As the first FTA that the EU has concluded with an ASEAN member, we believe that the EU-Singapore FTA will have a positive catalytic effect for the other bilateral FTAs that the EU is currently negotiating with our other ASEAN partners. The EU-Singapore FTA will provide the impetus for other ASEAN countries and the EU to move towards a broader region-to-region agreement in the near future. And once the EU-Singapore FTA enters into force, it will deliver new market access for companies from both sides and create common regulatory rules for our companies. Like the RCEP, TPP, and other initiatives that Singapore participates in, we hope that all these will translate into new growth opportunities for Singapore and our partners. In the course of these negotiations, it's important to keep in mind that ultimately it is the benefits to businesses that really matter, as they are the eventual end users of all these agreements. Businesses based in these countries will then be able to take full advantage of the new frontiers that these agreements forge. More significantly, such initiatives will also provide a boost to the multilateral trading system. We see these faster-moving bilateral and plurilateral FTAs acting as valuable pathfinders and building blocks for new ideas to be implemented in the larger multilateral platforms. So, ladies and gentlemen, the evolving demographics and economic agenda of the Asia-Pacific countries will give this region continuing growth momentum. Given the importance of trade within the Asia-Pacific, it is important for us to maintain an open economy and for FTA networks to be developed and nurtured. With time, we hope that our efforts on trade liberalization will bear fruit and enrich the lives of all the people in this region. As one of many small states today, policy options remain limited to us, and Singapore will continue to be a staunch advocate of free trade and appropriate vehicles that can further this agenda. Singapore is a natural catalyst for greater region-to-region integration, and we are committed to remain open in the world economy. A free and open global economy is an important part of the Singapore growth story, and we will strive to ensure that the trading environment remains conducive for our businesses to grow and expand both regionally and internationally. All of you here are opinion multipliers. I hope you can also help spread this message widely. Thank you.
Minister, thank you very much for delivering that lecture. In that address, you focused very strongly and clearly on the imperative for Singapore to aid efforts in pursuit of an increasingly free and open multilateral trading system. And you talked about the WTO and other multilateral engagements, including the ASEAN Economic Community, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the ASEAN-Hong Kong FTA, the TPP, ultimately the FTA of the Asia-Pacific, and of course also the recent EU-Singapore FTA. And you stressed the point that it's the benefits for businesses that really matter, but you also made it clear, and I think this was a crucial point, that trade liberalization has the potential to enrich the lives of people in this region. We now have approximately 25 minutes in which members of our audience here in the Fullerton Hotel will have the opportunity to pose questions from the floor. Could I ask that those of you who wish to ask questions of the Minister should say who you are and give your institutional affiliation, and also please try to make your questions as brief as possible. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, stay in your seat, and the microphone will come to you, and the Minister will take the questions one at a time. So first of all, sir in the middle here.
Thank you. Patrick Dahm of Rhode Island Davidson. Minister, one of the defining elements of another single market in the world is the free movement of capital and goods, of services, and of labor. With regard to the Asian Economic Community of 2015, is Singapore aiming for the same?
Thank you very much.
In the AEC 2015, we have the roadmap for 3 or 4 pillars. The first pillar is to create a single market and a single production base. And to achieve that, we want to achieve free movement of goods, free movement of services, and free movement of qualified people. I think we have to be pragmatic. Small countries like Singapore, Brunei, or Laos, we cannot achieve the same mobility or freedom of mobility for labor and people as is done in the EU. So we have a caveat there that this is for freer movement of skilled and qualified labor. In the second pillar, we try to achieve a more competitive region. This means nurturing competitive policies, freer capital movement. In the third area, we try to have a less inequitable, or we try to achieve a more equitable development. So we try to help some of our ASEAN countries to level up. So this requires initiatives like the integration of ASEAN, development efforts to bring other ASEAN economies up. And the fourth area, the fourth pillar, is to make sure ASEAN is integrated to the world. And in that pillar, we have FTAs with our ASEAN partners, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, India. And at this moment, we are putting this 10+1 FTAs together into a 10+6 FTA. So this is the huge undertaking that I mentioned in my speech, the RCEP. In the fourth pillar also, we are committed to keep ASEAN connected to the rest of the world, including through the Asia Pacific. And this is where the TPP comes in, and eventually the free trade area for the Asia Pacific. So this is the four pillars and the roadmap setting out what we have to do between now and 2015. And the roadmap of actions is then divided into yearly work program. So we are progressing towards that goal. But we have to be realistic on the scope and the ambition of the AEC 2015.
Sir, at the back.
Good evening, Mr. Minister. My name is Dinesh Kannan, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm an intern at Philanthropy Works. My question for you this evening is that should companies target to maximize their profits at all costs, and this is at the backdrop of the haze, or should we develop a greater tendency to ensure that the society is not harmed during the course of a work? And as a follow-up question to that, has Singapore's views on corporate social responsibility changed amidst the haze? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think all companies exist for the wide range of their stakeholders. Key among their stakeholders are their investors, their shareholders, but there are also other stakeholders, the community and the rest of our society. So I think for many companies, or for most companies, corporate social responsibility is a critical part of their company's mission and raison d'etre. It's not just for profits alone.
Thank you, Minister. Sir.
Thank you very much for taking my question. My name is Yoshi Oka from NHK, Japan's public TV station. My question is regarding the TPP. Japan is going to participate in TPP from the next round in Malaysia. So my question is what kind of role do you expect Japan to play in especially rule-making arguments apart from the market access? And I'd be pleased if you could specify a little bit more what kind of area, what kind of issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as you know, Singapore fully supports the participation of Japan in TPP, and we do so for extremely good reasons. First, Japan is the third largest economy in the world, so adding Japan to the current slate of TPP members gives us collectively greater heft. So it's a big addition to the TPP partnership. Second, we sorely need a representative from Northeast Asia in our TPP slate. So with Japan's participation, I think we now have a better balance. ASEAN countries, South American countries, North America, and also now Japan from Northeast Asia. Third, I think Japan, as I mentioned in my speech, will form one of a critical group of countries that can eventually form the bridge between the TPP and the RCEP. We have 4 ASEAN countries, and we have Australia, New Zealand, but these are not very big economies. And with Japan forming part of this bridge of 7 countries that can eventually help merge RCEP and TPP, I think this is a tremendous boost to the potential success of this merger between the RCEP and TPP. So for all these reasons, we fully support Japan's participation in the TPP. We do recognize that, of course, Japan has several challenges in acceding or in joining the TPP, and coming in at this later stage, of course, adds to these challenges. But we were very encouraged by the boldness of the Japanese government in deciding that even at this not so early stage, is still in Japan's strategic interest to join the TPP. So we applaud this very bold move, and we will support Japan completely when Japan joins us in July.
Thank you. Minister, could I ask a question? One important matter that came up in your speech, and which that question related to, is the matter of the merger, the potential merger between RCEP and the TPP to form ultimately a pan-regional FTA of the Asia Pacific. What in Singapore's view might be a realistic timescale for that all-encompassing regional FTA?
Well, I don't want to underplay the challenges involved in creating an FTA for the Asia Pacific. I mean, this is a huge undertaking. The way we envisage it is that with the TPP and the RCEP, we now have 2 very pragmatic pathways involving the US in one side and China on the other side. And the TPP has been making very good progress. We just completed our 17th round of negotiations in Peru, and we are meeting again in Kuala Lumpur or in Malaysia in July. I don't think we can reasonably expect to complete it by October this year, even though that was the target set to us by our leaders. As Singaporeans say, die we try, but it's a huge task to try and do this by October. But having a deadline is always a very good way of ensuring focus and ensuring pressure on the chief negotiators and their negotiating teams. So I think realistically we can expect this to go past the October deadline. On the RCEP, our challenges are different. Today we already have the 10+1, the ASEAN +1 FTAs with China, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and with India. So to put this together into FTA for 16 countries, ideally, you want to set the target as leveling up and going beyond. Otherwise, it makes no sense for us in ASEAN. If we already have an FTA with China, why do you want an FTA of 16 countries that has a level of ambition that's lower than the 10+1? So ideally, we should tell everybody that to achieve RCEP, we should level up and go beyond in terms of ambition. That, of course, will be a very difficult task because, as you all know, the level of ambition of the various 10+1 FTAs, the level of ambition is quite divergent. And to level up in every area, I think, will be a very difficult undertaking. So we have to maintain a reasonably high level of ambition, because we recognize that the TPP has set itself a very high level of ambition, and if the RCEP achieves a much lower level of ambition, then when you come to the table, it's not a merger of equals. The gap is too large for there to be convergence. So this is something that we hope the RCEP partners realize, that if we are looking at this eventual goal of putting together an FTA for the Asia Pacific, then the level of ambition has to be maintained. Now, beyond the level of ambition is also the coverage, because traditionally FTAs is just of goods, services, and investment. But in the TPP, we are now evolving into an agreement that covers other areas as well, new areas which are not in traditional FTAs. And this is what is termed as a 21st century agreement with new and quite exciting coverage in terms of scope. So we also have to make sure that there's some compatibility in the coverage. So it's not just ambition, but also the scope and the coverage of the two FTAs. Then strategically, when both are completed, and we sit on the table, and with the 4 ASEAN countries, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, forming the bridge of the two FTAs, then I think we have a reasonably optimistic chance to bring about the merger of the two and achieve an FTA for the Asia Pacific. In terms of timeline, it's always very difficult to set timelines. The TPP has the advantage of being of 3 years already. It's been negotiating since the last 3 years. The RCEP has the advantage that it has very pragmatic building blocks of the 10+1. So in the RCEP, we set ourselves the target of achieving it by 2015. So TPP, we have the leaders telling us to complete it by October this year. If we can't achieve that, it will go into 2014 and maybe also into 2015. So the timelines are not too far off. And in the nature of FTAs, there's likely to be delays in trying to achieve a highly ambitious FTA. So I would say it's definitely within our grasp. It's something that's doable, and it's something that is worthy of us trying to achieve it. Because if we can achieve an FTA for the Asia Pacific, I think this will change the environment for all the companies operating in this region.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Shihan. I'm from Control Risk. So I think you've made it quite clear that members of ASEAN are willing to cooperate when it comes to matter of business opportunities, but the same can't be said for other matters such as the transboundary haze, of which ASEAN has been extremely quiet during the period where Singapore experienced its worst haze in history. So my question to you comes in 2 parts. Firstly, is this situation set to change? And secondly, will Indonesia ever sign the transboundary haze agreement?
Well, I'm sorry to give you the wrong impression because I'm from trade industry. I've been focusing on the economic side. In the ASEAN community, there are in fact 3 pillars. There's the AEC, the economic community, there's the political community, and there's also a social community. So there are also 2 other groups working closely together to bring about this regional community that we want to achieve by 2015. So it's not true that we are all economic animals. I mean, we also have parallel agendas on the political integration, people-to-people interactions, connectivity in all kinds, in all areas, not just infrastructure, but also in people-to-people connectivity, cultural connectivity. And we also have the pathways and the roadmap for social integration. So on the specifics of the haze problem, this is something that is long-standing. We understand the domestic challenges that Indonesia face, but we also applaud the efforts by the Indonesian government to try and deal with these challenges. I think it's clear that we cannot have this situation recurring year after year or getting worse in some years. And I think there has to be political commitment and will to resolve these challenges.
Thank you. At the back, sir.
Evening, Minister. My name is Sean, I'm Chief Editor of the Asian Observer. I had a question regarding Myanmar, actually. In 2010, Myanmar initiated construction of a deep water port project in its southern city of Dawei, in a bid to open up its economy, as you can see right now. And part of the project right now is they are involved in building a high-speed railway that stretches all the way from Burma into Vietnam, up into China. My question is, do you foresee any implications for Singapore in terms of whether this will affect our seaborne trade, and whether the government has any plans to reduce our economic dependence on seaborne trade?
Well, I think for Singapore, the lesson for us has always been the same. We cannot expect the world to remain still. The world is evolving, changing, and we have to meet the new conditions that we are faced with. In ASEAN, we are in favor of greater connectivity. That's not just connectivity by roads, by air, but also by ports. So you cannot imagine or you cannot expect the world to remain the same. We are a hub for Southeast Asia. We are a transshipment port for Southeast Asia. But as individual ASEAN countries grow, the patterns of trade will change, and we will have to adapt accordingly. There'll be new ports that we can service. There'll be other ports that will grow bigger, and it'll be more sensible for them to have direct point-to-point connections rather than coming through us as a transshipment port. So these patterns will change, and our job is to adapt, evolve, and make sure we continue to be relevant even as these patterns change. So we cannot assume the world to remain still. We must assume that competition will arise and competition will evolve, and our job is to continue to be relevant and continue to be competitive.
Thank you.
Minister, sir, Raymond Kwok from Oxford Economics, PE Investment and VC.com. During your speech, you mentioned something about currency competitiveness. Basically, I think, between the situation in Europe and US, things seems to be stabling. But you mentioned about the currency fluctuations and competitive. Can you share with us, with Europe having their euro, which is one currency, but that is also the cause of the problem? Within ASEAN, there was some talk about ASEAN currency, but then I think that has been basically put under the back burner. How do we look at currency, various countries, and how do we look at the trade issues, and how do we stay competitive while we have all this FTA, but the individual country also have their own currency to manage, basically?
Well, my only reference to currency devaluation or competitive currency devaluation was the G20 statement or exhortations for countries not to engage in competitive devaluation. Within ASEAN itself, we are very pragmatic. We are not at a stage where we can embark on a single currency, and the experience of Euro reinforced our conviction. So that is not part of our roadmap and not something that we are embarking on doing in the immediate future. I think we are pragmatic enough that there are many things that we ought to be doing to improve our competitiveness, to integrate our economies. Having a single currency is not and should not be one of these priority agenda items.
My name is Willy Hess from Pi Technology. Minister Lim, you mentioned numerous FTAs. What role will the WTO, World Trade Organization, play in the future? Are they still necessary?
Absolutely. I mean, I started off by emphasizing the primacy of WTO. I think without the multilateral framework, the global trading system providing the empire for the rules, and if we all fragment into regional FTAs, then I think the situation will be worse off for all countries, and particularly for small countries like Singapore. So it's imperative that we maintain WTO, we maintain the relevance of WTO as a global regime with the enforcement abilities to maintain the same rules for everybody. Otherwise, the big boys will have their own set of rules, and small players like Singapore will be totally disadvantaged. There are some things that can only be done at a multilateral level. For example, Singapore is not an agricultural country, but we empathize with many of the developing countries that see agricultural trade distorted by subsidies, particularly in Europe and in US. You know, the farm bills and the support given to the farming sector. And these subsidies and these distortions are not likely to be removed at the bilateral level or at the regional level. You require a global agreement for this to be removed. And so we completely empathize with many of the developing countries which depend on agriculture, that you need a successful WTO agreement to have all these distortions and all these agricultural subsidies removed. It's not likely that they'll ever be removed on a bilateral basis. So that's one area where it's absolutely necessary for us to have a global multilateral agreement.
Pierre Noël. At the front.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for the great speech. I'm Pierre Noël from IISS. I would like to ask you a question about people who resist free trade. So perhaps bring you back to the politics of free trade and of trade, generally speaking. So traditionally, people who resist free trade are people who want to protect some sort of monopoly rents. They're rent seekers. That's what we learn at university. And the moral case against rent-seeking companies is very clear and easy to make. But in the new world that we've now entered, a lot of people resist trade because they essentially, basically are workers in already developed countries who do not want to be put in direct competition with people whose wages are a fraction of theirs and whose technological capabilities are a much bigger fraction of theirs. In other words, they are people who have objectively a lot to lose from free trade. So how do you make and the moral case against this type of objections is much less clear than was the case maybe 50 years ago. So how do you make the case for free trade when you directly or indirectly, as a politician, have to face those people?
Well, I think you raise a very important issue, and that is economically, we are all convinced that free trade and the benefits of free trade will enhance the economic pie, and there's greater benefits for everybody. But unfortunately, that benefits accrue to different groups and to the economy as a whole. So you have the impact, sometimes adverse, on certain groups, certain companies, and on certain sectors or workers in the sectors. So you have to find a way, not just demonstrating that there are benefits to the society and to the economy as a whole, but actively provide the trade adjustments needed so that those who are adversely affected are helped and make the adjustments because of this impact. And then the overall benefits to the economy is then accreted to everybody. So one of the key areas, for example, that we try to encourage is what we call trade adjustment policies. You know that with an FTA, there'll be some sectors and there'll be some workers in these sectors who will be adversely affected, and the government and society must actively reach out to this group to help them make the transition so that the impact is not just felt by them and the benefits accrue to everybody in society, that you must have this transfer of benefits to them as well. So that is the political challenge.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we must bring the question and answer session to an end now. That was quite a range of questions touching in places, perhaps unsurprisingly, on the haze affecting Singapore at the moment, as well as also on a whole range of questions about trade, and ending with Pierre Noël's very, very probing question about how to convince those who do not see the benefits of free trade. I must soon bring this lecture as a whole to an end, but before doing so, I'd like to thank you, Minister, for finding the time in your very busy schedule to grace us with your presence and to deliver the lecture here this evening, and for engaging with the audience here at the Fullerton Hotel. You spoke on a topic of great importance, not only to the government of Singapore, but also to all those who are interested in seeing freer trade and the resultant benefits that it can bring to businesses and people across the region. So thank you again, Mr. Lim, for speaking here this evening, and to our audience for their attention and for their participation in the question and answer session. Thank you very much.